Hello, 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 hello. You guys ready? We're ready. We're ready to take this test because remember, every practice test is like you taking the test for the very first time. So making sure you know how to do this. So graphing, make sure you have 5 points. Well, the first thing I notice about this equation, this parabola, quadratic equation, is my vertex would be 2, -4. The reason I know this is because this is opposite, so this moves it right 2, this moves it down 4. Now, what I'm going to do is go into my graphing calculator, figure out what my other points should be. So you go into your y equals, and type in your -2, parenthesis, x minus 2 squared minus 4, and now when you're doing this, you want to make sure to highlight your vertex. So your vertex should be in the middle. Now I'm going to write in my other points. I have 1, -6, I have 0, -12, I have 3, -6, and I have 4, -12. One thing I know is that this is a 10 by 10 grid, so for sure I'm not going to be able to fit the -12. But since I have it right here, I will still get the points on my test. When in third person, I would grade it. So I'm just going to plot 1, -6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Here's 1, -6, 2, -4. 3, -6, and -12, it would be someplace down here. So that's the first part of doing your graph. Now my domain, remember, your domain is how far left do you go? I go on forever. My right, I go on forever. Left and right, that's my domain. So it's going to be all real numbers, or you can have it written like this, -infinity to infinity. My range, when I look at my range, it's my y. And when I look at this point right here, this is y is equal to -4. When I look at that, it's -4 because of this point right here. My vertex is -4. I'm going to put my -4. Now I'm going to think, is my graph above this point? Is it someplace up here? Or is it someplace down here? Well, it's down here. So y is getting smaller, so y is less than or equal to. So that's my domain and range. Next one. This one again is in vertex form. So when I look at this, my vertex is going to be a -1, 0. I moved left 1. I did not move up and down. So again, you go to your calculator. This is where you have to be able to use your calculator. Now the nice thing about this problem is when I use my calculator, I see they have decimals. I don't really want to plot decimals, so I'm not going to. You can pick whatever numbers you want. You could pick -2 and then 0.25, but I'm going to pick -3 and 1, and I'm also going to pick -5 and 4, because I think that would just be easier for me to graph. I'm getting this off the table on your graphing calculator. These numbers are from my table. Now I'm going to plot these points. So again, here are my points. The 1/4, so I missed it. The 1/4 makes it stretch out. It's compressed. So my domain, again, I go left and right for infinity. This is my furthest down I'm going to go. And then that point, that's my y value. Remember, y is always your 0 in this case. So y is 0, and it's above this point, so that means y is greater than or equal to. Next problem, first I have to know, writing this in vertex form, what vertex form is. So this is my vertex form. You have to know that. So I have to figure out what my k is, and I also have to figure out what h and k is. H and k is the easiest one because that's my vertex. So my vertex here, I'm going to write my vertex. Would give me a -2, -1. So again, that's my h value and that's my k value. Now, when you're doing your points or when you're figuring out what your a is, there's different ways you can do this. You can count, or you can pick these 3 points, because those 3 points are on your graph, and go to your stat and plug in L1 as -3, -2, -1, and then L2 be 1, -1, 1. And then go to your stat quadratic regression. Or, I'm going to count. So from your vertex, always to the first point on the right, I go up 2 over 1. So that's a positive 2 over 1. So my actual equation would be y equals, my a here would be 2. X, because this right here is negative, remember this is opposite, I'm going to put plus 2 here. That should always be opposite, and it would be a negative, and then -1. And that would be my final answer. Next. So when I'm looking at this, first I have to find the vertex. That's going to be using my opposite b for 2a. So if I want to, I can write out a is equal to 2, b is equal to 3, c is equal to -10. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So my vertex then would be opposite b over 2a. Again, this is where I get the b, and this is where I get the a, which is negative 3/4. So that's my vertex. That's the h value of my vertex. So I'm going to write my negative 3/4. Now, how am I going to find my k value? And since I know this is where you have to use your calculator, because if you don't want to deal with fractions, that's fine. Just type this into your calculator. So in both of these spots goes where my x is. Again, x value I found out is negative 3/4, so here's an x and here's an x. You want to make sure to keep that squared. And technically, you could have two different answers here. This is equal to negative 11.125 or negative 89 over 8. I'm going to leave it as negative 89 over 8 because that's what my x value is in fraction, so I'm going to leave my other answer in fraction. So now, my vertex, got that? Make sure you have parentheses here, negative 3/4, negative 89 over 8. Now I'm going to focus on my a. My a will help me draw a sketch of this. So since my a is positive, my graph would be pointing up because my a is positive. So my vertex would be a minimum at y is equal to negative 89 over 8. Remember, how far left and how far right goes on forever and goes on forever. Range, this is the farthest down I'll go. So I'm dealing with my y value. Range is your y value. So I'm going to write down my y value. And look at this, the graph goes above it. So y is greater than or equal to because it goes above. So my next question, I actually have two sets of questions here. It says first write it in vertex form, then graph it. Make sure you have 2 points. My vertex form here, I already have my a, so now I have to do my opposite b over 2a. However, since I'm graphing it anyways, I'm going to make my table and have opposite b over 2a. So this becomes a negative 2 over negative 2, which is equal to 1. So now actually I don't have my y value, but I'm going to plug into my table, and I could plug it back into my equation just like we did above, or I'm going to just plug it right into my table so then I can figure what all my points are together. So again, you go to your y equals, then you go to second graph to get to your table. Now my vertex is 1, and when I look at my table, that's 1, 4. And I have 0, 3, negative 1, 0, 2, 3, 3, 0. Remember, if these numbers do not kind of repeat, knowing your vertex is in the middle, you probably have the wrong vertex. So I'm actually going to plot these points. So my vertex form would be y equals, remember my a value is the same a value at the beginning. My a value is negative 1 here. My a value is negative 1 here. You could just have a negative if you want to. X, my vertex is right here, right in this location. Be x minus 1 squared plus 4. Done. Domain, all real numbers. Range, my y value is 4, and it's going below that point, so y is less than or equal to. Done. Next one, this is where you have to be able to use your calculator. Again, you push stat. If you have anything in your L1 you want to clear it, do not delete clear. You put in your numbers. And then stat, calculate, you want quadratic regression, so that's number 5. Make sure you keep on pushing enter until it actually gives you the answer. So first, you're writing out your quadratic model. So your a is given, your a should be 5x squared, so you have to include that x squared. And then your b is given, it's a negative, so I'm going to write subtract 17x. And then my c is given, 495. Great. Now I'm going to use that equation to help me figure this out. It says use the model to find the fish in week 11. Now again, this is weeks, this is weeks. This was L1, so that's my x value. So I'm going to plug in my x value. It says plug 11 into your equation. Now when you're doing this, you don't want to, if for some reason the chart gave you the numbers, you always want to base it off the equation that you just found. So my first one would be 113 fish. Second question is, during which week was the fish at the lowest? So again, that's a vertex, high, max, min, lowest. So according to the function, not the table. So this is where I'm actually have to go to your y equals. Plug in your equation. So 5x squared minus 17x plus 495. Again, I would always start off with going to zoom and go to zoom standard, which is number 6. And right now when I'm looking at this graph, I can't see it. So I'm going to have to zoom out. So I'm going to go to zoom, push number 3 to zoom out. Remember, you have to keep on pushing enter. I still can't see it. I'm going to push enter, so I'm going to have to push enter again. Now, one thing that I notice about my C value is so high, the 495, it's going to be a very high number. Still can't see it. Pushing enter again. Oh, I see a very, very small faint of a number. So I'm going to go to my window. And it looks like I need nothing below. So when I go and I notice that this is 495 right here, I'm going to go and put my Y minimum at 450 and then push graph. And hopefully that will help me see my graph. Well, it looks like just a line. So I'm going to go back to my window. And it looks my X values are just too big. So I'm going to make that from negative 100 to 100. This is the point where if you can't get the graph to show up, you can ask me for help and I can try to help you. So now I see my graph. I need to calculate it. So I have to go to second, trace to get to calculator. I need my minimum. So it says left bound, push enter, right bound, move the bug so it's on the right hand side, push enter, guess. So try to guess where the vertex is, push enter. Now it gives me my, it gives me my answer as 1.6, well actually round to 1.7, and 480.55. So it's saying fish population, so I have to know, is that my X or my Y? So population, if I go back and if I look, population was the Y value. So my answer would be 480.55 fish. Now if you rounded to 480, that's fine. If you rounded to 481, I would also accept that. And all the last questions are all factoring. So first, when I'm looking at your problem, you should always be thinking, what do I have in common, what can I take out? Second thing you should be thinking, you don't want this one to be negative. That makes your life harder. So I'm going to factor out a negative. Get that out of there. So I have x squared. This becomes a minus 2x. This becomes a minus 80. Now some people are able to factor right into their 2 parentheses right away. If not, make your box. But one thing when I'm doing this, I factored out a negative. I still have to make sure to represent that negative in my answer. So my x squared goes in this box, negative 80. So I'm going to be adding to negative 2x, multiplying. When I look at this, remember we multiply these two numbers together, get negative 80. So what two numbers would work? I would say since it's such a small number to add to, they have to be close together. So it would be 8 and 10. So it's a negative 2, so it's going to be a negative 10x times 8x gives me a negative 80. Plus when I add them together, it gives me a negative 2. So then I look, what do these two have in common? These two, these two, these two. Remember, when you're doing this, this would give me an x. If this number is negative, you want to make sure to take out that negative, and they both have a negative 10 in common. Then I have an x, and then two numbers would be, I have an 8 in common. So I have my x minus 10 and x plus 8. Remember, whenever there's not a number in front, typically these should end up being the same numbers as these two when there's not a number in front, Don't forget to represent that negative. So for this first problem, I'm looking, what do they all have in common? They all have a factor of 2 in common, so I'm going to take out that 2, leaving me with a 7x squared minus 4x minus 3. Again, I'm taking out the 2, so I'm dividing the 2 out. So now I'm going to create my box. But before I do that, so don't forget, I'm going to put my 2 here and my 2 parentheses. Creating my box. Remember, in your boxes, top one is 7x squared, negative 3, and I'm adding, that says add, to 4x. Because again, that's my middle term here, so that's how you know what to add to. If I multiply 7 times negative 3, that's negative 21. So I'm looking for numbers that multiply to get negative 21, add to get negative 4. Well, actually, that's going to be negative 7x and a positive 3x. They multiply to get negative 21, and they also add to get negative 4. So I'm looking here first. What do these both have in common? They have an x in common. What do these two have in common? This is negative, so I have to take out a negative. Even though that one, they don't have anything in common besides that negative 1. What do these two have in common? Well, they both have a 7 and an x. And this one's positive, so I'm going to take out a positive 7x. And my next two, they both have a 3, or just the 3 in common. So I have x minus 1 and 7x plus 3. Next one, again, when I look at this, they don't have anything in common. There's nothing in common there, so I can't take anything out. I also know this is going to be a big 1. So when I set this up, I have my 18x squared, negative 14. I'm adding to get positive 9x. I'm multiplying 18 times negative 14, negative 252. Man, that's a big number. So I'm going to look for factors of 252. So I looked at my calculator a bit. Since 252, I divided it by some even numbers. So I just wrote 2 of them down. So I wrote down, I divided it by 6, I got negative 42. I divided by 12, I got 21. Now this one works, because 12 plus 21 would give me 9. Negative 12 plus 21 would give me 9, and that's what I'm working towards. So I have negative 12x in one box and 21x in the other. So I'm thinking factoring out each of the boxes. So for this first one, they're both divisible by 3 into x. 18 and 21 are both divisible by 3. The negative 12, since it's negative, I have to take out a negative, and that's a 2. And then my 18 and 12, they're both divisible by 6 and an x. And my 21 and 14, they're both divisible by 7. So my answer would be 3x minus 2, 6x plus 7. First one, what do they have in common? What can I take out? I can take out a 2. So I'm going to take out that 2. Leaving me with 72 divided by 2 is 36. Well, 36x squared minus 1. One thing I noticed right off the bat is these two numbers. These two numbers are perfect squares. I have to keep factoring because there's a square right here also. So perfect squares, and I have my 2 in front that I just factored out. The square root of 36 is 6, so that would split up my 6's. And the square root of 1 is 1. Since I'm adding to get 0, so another way that I could have written this out would look like this, 36x plus 0x minus 1. So add together to get 0. This should be plus and minus. Next problem. So again, first when I look at this, what do they have in common? What can I take out? They both have a 2 and an x in common. So 8x divided by 2x would give me 4x. And 6x divided by 2x would give me 3. Now in this case, if I look at this, this is just to the first power. I'm done. This is done. This would be my answer, 2x. And the reason I do not have to keep factoring compared to the last one is because the x squared did not have, or the x here does not have a squared. So again, what do they have in common? What can I take out? 19 is prime, so I can't take anything out. So this is going to be another doozy of one. So I'm going to give myself some, give myself some room here. 6x squared goes in the first, 15 goes in the second. I'm adding, remember you add to get your middle number. And this time it's going to be a negative 19. So if I do 6 times 15, I'm looking at, 6 times 15, 90. Now one thing about this, when I'm looking for my factors, I know it's divisible by 5, so I'm going to divide by 5 first. So 5 and 18. One of them, or since it's positive, they both would have to be negative. How do I know that? Because this is multiplying to get a positive. This one is adding to get negative. So I would have a negative 5 and a negative 18, which does not work. So I want two smaller numbers. So let's try if I had a negative 10 and a negative 9. Well, those multiply to get positive 90, and they also add together to get negative 19. So that's my two numbers. Negative 10, negative 9. So again, you're looking at what do these have in common. So those both have a 3 and an x in common. Next one, since it's negative, I'm taking out a negative, and they both have a 5. 10 and 15 have a 5. 6 and 10, they both have a 2 and an x. And 9 and 15, since it's negative, has a negative 3. So it would be 3x minus 5, 2x. That's a 2 minus 3. And bing, bada, boom, we're done. We're done. Yep, making sure. Make sure you're asking questions. Factoring usually is the hardest. And when you're factoring, I will help you set up the table if you need to, your boxes, but I will not help you find the numbers. You have to find the numbers by yourself. So you have a great, grand, wonderful time in your life right now.